Ever been caught in a disagreement about property lines, or maybe just felt that sort of primal urge to have your own little piece of the world?
Oh, definitely. It feels fundamental, doesn't it?
It does. Okay, let's unpack this because the rules governing, who owns what land and the rights that come with it are surprisingly deep and well tangled.
They really are. What seems as simple as drawing a line on a map actually has this incredibly complex legal history and framework just sitting behind it.
Exactly. So, welcome to this deep dive. We're getting to grips with the fundamentals of property law in England and Wales.
Hmm.
Our starting point is the introductory material from the University of London's Undergraduate Laws VLE module. Now look, before your eyes glaze over, this isn't just dry legal text, honestly. This is about the very foundation of how we relate to land.
Which is, a core source of wealth and power.
Right, and something that shapes our lives in just countless ways.
And understanding these foundational principles, well, it offers crucial insights into so many aspects of society, housing, economic development, you name it.
Precisely. So if you've ever felt a bit lost when conversations turn to things like mortgages or leases or even just the general idea of property rights,
Which happens a lot.
it does.
Hmm.
Consider this your express route to getting a really solid understanding. We're here to pull out the key ideas without hopefully drowning you in legal jargon.
And our sources today, they're basically designed to introduce new law students to property law. So they include overviews of the subject, what students are expected to learn,
Loading outcomes.
right, and how the module is structured, recommended reading, and how they'll eventually be assessed.
And even at this introductory level, you start to see these fascinating historical threads and the sheer number of layers that can exist in land ownership. It quickly becomes clear it's about so much more than just, buying and selling houses.
Yeah, what's particularly interesting is how even this initial material hints at the really long, evolving history that underpins our modern property law system.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward. We want to extract the most vital insights, what property law is all about, why it's so important, and the main areas it covers. We want to give you a real bedrock of understanding.
Sounds
So
good.
let's jump in. Fundamentally, what is property law?
Well, at its heart, property law governs the relationship between people and land. Simple as that sounds. It sets out the rights that individuals and other entities like companies have concerning the ownership of land.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes way beyond just physically occupying a space.
Right. As the material points out, land isn't just where we live. It's central to so much of what we do, our economic well-being, even how power is structured in society. It really is a fundamental building block.
Absolutely. And the concept stretches beyond just sort of complete ownership. Property law also deals with what the module calls lesser rights of entitlement over land.
Okay, lesser rights.
Yeah.
Like what?
Well, think about a mortgage, where a bank has a financial stake in the property. Or an easement that's a right for someone else to use your land for a specific purpose, like a shared driveway or maybe utility lines.
Got it. So it's rarely a simple picture of just one person holding all the cards when it comes to a piece of land. There can be these different layers of rights and interests.
Exactly.
And the module highlights that we also need to understand how these rights actually come into being and how they can be transferred between people.
Yes, that dynamic element is absolutely key. Property law provides the rules for establishing these rights, and crucially, for their movement within society, buying, selling, inheriting, gifting.
Now, today, when we think about land, our minds often go straight to the property market, don't they? Buying and selling.
Hmm.
But the module touches on the fact that this hasn't always been the dominant way of thinking about land. It mentions that different societies have had fundamentally different approaches.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is to just pause and consider those different approaches. The module specifically mentions Indigenous Australian perspectives,
Right.
where the whole concept of individual land ownership, as we understand it in the West, is often completely at odds with their deep spiritual and cultural connection to the land. It's a totally different relationship.
It really makes you rethink our own assumptions, doesn't it?
It does. And communal ownership models in other parts of the world also offer a really stark contrast to our system.
So the module explains that in England and Wales, there was this kind of shift historically towards land operating within a market system, with the primary goal being efficient and secure buying and selling.
Yes, but this market-centric approach, while it feels normal to us today, is actually a relatively recent development in the long history of land and law.
Right.
The module rightly emphasizes the deep historical roots of English land law, stretching all the way back to the Norman conquest in 1066.
1066. Oh, well, that's ancient history. And the module mentions that even now we can still see the influence of these old origins in modern land law. It specifically points to the doctrine of tenure,
Tenure.
essentially the idea that all land is ultimately held from the crown, and the law of adverse possession, which is about gaining ownership through, well, long unchallenged occupation. Squatters' rights, essentially.
Kind of, yeah. Adverse possession. And these historical echoes are significant. The doctrine of tenure, while it's largely theoretical in everyday transactions now, it still technically underpins the fundamental basis of land ownership in England and Wales.
Huh.
And adverse possession, that ability to potentially gain legal title by occupying land without the owner's permission for a set period, well, that also has these really deep historical roots.
It's kind of wild to think that principles from almost 1,000 years ago still have some subtle impact today. But the module reassures us that the main focus is on how modern land law works in practice, right?
Precisely. Understanding the history gives you context, absolutely, but the emphasis for students, and for us today, is firmly on contemporary law and how it's applied now.
Okay, good. Now, the module really stresses that land law is complex. It uses this helpful idea of a single piece of land having multiple legal interests attached to it all at the same time. Can you give us some sort of concrete examples of what that might actually look like?
Certainly. Let's imagine someone owns the freehold of a house that's, the most complete form of ownership available in England and Wales.
Right, freehold.
But they might have granted a lease on that same property to someone else for, say, 25 years. Now, that leaseholder has a legally recognized interest and a whole set of rights to occupy the property for that term.
Okay, so we've got the freehold owner and the leaseholder already. What other interests could be in play on that same house?
Well, it's very likely the freehold owner financed the purchase with a mortgage from a bank.
Mm-hmm. Most people do.
Exactly. So the bank then holds a charge over the property that's a legal right, basically, to take possession and sell the property if the loan isn't repaid.
Okay, so owner, leaseholder, bank.
And it doesn't necessarily stop there. A neighboring property owner might have an easement, which is a right to use a specific part of that land, perhaps for access, like a path across the garden, or maybe to run utility lines under or over it.
Right, the module mentioned those sorts of rights, easement.
Exactly. And finally, just to add another layer, there could be freehold covenants. These are agreements often made with previous owners that restrict what the current owner can actually do with the land.
Like what sort of restrictions?
Oh, things like maybe limiting building heights or restricting certain types of businesses from operating there, or even preventing alterations to the front of the house.
Wow. So a single house could have a freehold owner, a leaseholder, a mortgage lender with a charge, neighbors with rights of way, and restrictions on its use, all existing at the exact same time. That really brings home the complexity.
It really does. And it's this interplay between all these different types of rights, which have been shaped by history, practical needs, court decisions, that's case law, and laws passed by parliament statutes that makes property law such a rich and multifaceted area of study.
It's clearly way more involved than just the simple act of buying and selling. Now, why is understanding all of this so important? The module states, quite starkly, that property law is one of the 7 foundational areas of legal knowledge required for bar training. That sounds pretty significant.
It absolutely is. Its status as a foundational subject just highlights its central role within the entire legal system of England and Wales. Honestly, a strong grasp of property law principles is considered essential for anyone who wants to practice law here.
And the module itself aims to give students a solid grounding in how interests in land are created, protected, and transferred. But okay, how does this relate to you, the listener, who might not be planning a career in law? Why should you care about these intricacies?
Well, because the principles of property law are just woven into so many aspects of our daily lives and the world of business, too.
How so?
Well, whether you're renting an apartment, buying a home, maybe involved in property development, dealing with inheritance issues that involve land, or even just trying to understand certain commercial agreements, these legal principles are constantly at work, often behind the scenes.
It's like an invisible framework, isn't it? Something that underpins so much of our interaction with the physical world and our economic system.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, the module also outlines the key things students should know and be able to do by the end of it, the learning outcomes. What are the main knowledge takeaways they're aiming for?
Okay, so in terms of knowledge, the module aims to enable students to really understand the structure of modern land law and its core concepts. This includes grasping how common law, that's law developed through court decisions, statute law, and equity, those historical principles of fairness all interact.
Right, the different sources of law.
Exactly. It also covers how different types of ownership and other interests in land are acquired, how they're protected, and how they're transferred. And crucially, it emphasizes understanding the wider significance, the social, economic, ethical, and practical importance of property law.
So it's definitely not just about memorizing rules, but really understanding their broader impact on society. And what about the skills? What skills does the module aim to develop in students?
The focus here is very much on developing essential legal skills, being able to research legal materials effectively.
Which is key for any lawyer.
Absolutely. And critically applying their knowledge to analyze and solve legal problems. And also being able to evaluate and critique legal arguments specifically related to property law.
Those sound like really valuable skills that go way beyond just property law, don't they? I mean, research, critical thinking, problem solving, they're useful in pretty much any field.
Oh, completely. The skills developed through studying property law are highly transferable. They contribute to stronger analytical and critical thinking abilities in general, no question.
Now, to give us a sense of the specific areas within this broad topic, the module actually breaks down its content into 9 key areas. Could you maybe give us a quick run through of what those are, just the headlines?
Sure. So the module begins with general principles. This covers the fundamental concept of what land actually means in law, historical ideas like tenures and estates, the really important distinction between legal and equitable rights.
Okay.
A lot about the crucial legislation from 1925 that still shapes much of land law today. The process of transferring land, whether it's registered title or unregistered title, the necessary formalities for these transfers, like needing a deed.
Hmm.
The concept of overreaching, which is where certain equitable interests can sometimes be detached from the land and attached to the money paid for it instead, and some basic principles of the older unregistered land system.
Wow, okay, that's a packed first topic. What comes after the general principles?
The second area focuses specifically on the registration of title. This is the modern system of recording land ownership and interests on a central register, governed mainly by the Land Registration Acts of 1925 and 2002. It's a really central part of modern land law.
Right, the land registry.
Exactly. Following that is co-ownership and trusts of land. This includes the Trusts of Land and Appointment of Trustees Act 1996, often called TOLATA, which deals with how land is owned by more than one person, either legally or beneficially, and the framework for managing that shared ownership.
Okay, so we've got the basics, how ownership is recorded, and what happens when multiple people own land together. What are some of the other key topics covered?
Then comes landlord and tenant law. This looks at leases, their fundamental nature, how they're created, how they can be transferred or ended prematurely, like forfeiture, and also the crucial, sometimes tricky difference between a lease, which grants an interest in land, and a mere license, which is just permission to occupy.
Ah, the lease versus license distinction that comes up a lot.
It does, and this topic also covers the various promises and obligations within leases, known as leasehold covenants. After that, there's a fascinating area called proprietary estoppel.
Proprietary estoppel. Sounds technical.
It can be, but it's basically about fairness. It deals with situations where promises or assurances about land might create legal rights for someone, even if all the usual formal legal requirements like a written contract or deed haven't been met. It's equity stepping in.
That sounds like a really interesting area where fairness and expectations clash with strict legal rules. What else does the module cover?
Next up are easements and profits apprendre. We touched on easements earlier, rights over someone else's land, like rights of way. Profits apprendre are similar, but involve the right to take something from the land, like fishing or grazing rights. The module looks at their characteristics and how they're created, both expressly and impliedly. Then, freehold covenants, those restrictions on land use we talked about, like not building above a certain height. The module covers these in detail, examining the complex rules about how the burden and benefit of these promises can pass to future owners of the land.
Right, whether the promise runs with the land.
Precisely. Mortgages get their own topic, too. Their legal nature, how they're created, and the rights and remedies of both the borrower, the mortgager, and the lender, the mortgagee, especially if things go wrong.
Important stuff for homeowners.
Very much so. And finally, the module comes back to adverse possession, looking in detail at the specific legal requirements under modern legislation for gaining freehold title to land through that long, unchallenged occupation we mentioned earlier.
Phew. That really gives you a comprehensive map of the key territory within property law, doesn't it? It's helpful to see how all these different pieces fit together.
It is. It shows the breadth of the subject.
And for anyone listening who thinks, okay, I want to dig deeper into, say, easements or co-ownership, the module provides quite a substantial reading list. It really emphasizes that the online materials they provide are just the starting point.
That's absolutely right. Essential, but a starting point. While the online module provides the core information, students are strongly encouraged, really, expected to go further and engage with a good, detailed property law textbook. The module specifically recommends Mark Dixon's Modern Land Law as a key text, but lists others too.
And it's not just relying on what authors write about the law in textbooks, is it? The module also stresses the importance of going directly to the primary sources.
Yes, very much so. To the actual laws passed by Parliament, the statutes and the judgments made by judges in court cases, the case law.
Why is that direct engagement so important?
Well, there's really no substitute for reading the actual legal documents. Statutes are the written laws themselves, and case law shows how those laws and common law principles have been interpreted and applied by judges in real-world situations, often revealing nuances and complexities you wouldn't get just from a summary. It's crucial for a deeper understanding.
Makes sense. And for keeping up with the latest thinking and developments in this field, because law isn't static.
Not at all.
The module also points students towards a range of academic legal journals.
Indeed. Journals like the Law Quarterly Review, LQR, the Modern Law Review, MLR, the Conveyancer and Property Lawyer, and others. They publish cutting-edge research, analysis of recent cases, and critiques of current legal issues in property law. The module provides a list of several key journals in the field for students to explore.
It sounds like there's a real wealth of resources available for anyone who really wants to delve into the subject properly. It might seem like a lot, I suppose.
It can seem daunting at first.
Yeah, but as the module suggests, it just reflects the depth and the real significance of property law. Finally, just to complete the picture, the module touches on how understanding of this area is assessed for the students. It mentions an unseen examination.
That's correct. The main assessment for this particular module is a traditional unseen written examination, which is divided into 3 distinct parts.
Okay, can you give us a quick breakdown of what that exam actually looks like? What are they testing?
Sure. Part 1, which accounts for 25% of the total marks, focuses on a specific case that students are told about well in advance. They need to answer questions that demonstrate their deep understanding of the facts, the reasoning, any judicial disagreements, the case law used, and the wider impact of that specific case.
So real in-depth analysis of one significant judgment. What about the rest?
Parts 2 and 3 together make up the remaining 75%. Part 2 presents 4 problem-based questions, hypothetical scenarios, where students need to spot the legal issues and apply their knowledge to advise the fictional parties.
Practical application.
Exactly. And Part 3 offers 3 essay questions, requiring a more discursive, analytical, and sometimes critical approach to broader themes or areas of debate within property law. Students have to answer a total of 3 questions across Parts 2 and 3, making sure they pick at least one from Part 2 and at least one from Part 3.
So it's a mix of detailed case analysis, practical problem solving, and broader essay writing, testing different skills. And for those taking the exam, what materials are they allowed to actually have with them in the room?
It's what's called a closed book exam, so students can't bring in their own notes or textbooks. However, they are permitted to bring in one specific, unannotated statute book, Blackstone's Statutes on Property Law.
Just the statutes themselves.
Just the statutes, which means they need to know the case law and principles well.
Okay. It sounds like a pretty thorough assessment designed to test both what students know and, importantly, their ability to use that knowledge to analyze legal situations effectively. So, bringing it back to you, the listener, hopefully this overview gives you a valuable framework for understanding discussions and developments related to land and property that you might come across.
It really should. Having this foundational knowledge, even just from this overview, will hopefully allow you to approach this often complex area with a bit more clarity and a better understanding of the underlying principles that are at play whenever land is involved.
So just to summarize the key takeaways then. We've seen a property law basically governs our relationship with land. It has these incredibly deep historical roots going back centuries.
Right back to 1066.
It can involve multiple complex layers of rights on just a single piece of land. And it's absolutely a cornerstone of our legal system in England and Wales.
And it's a subject that's explored through a wide range of resources, statutes, cases, academic writing, and ultimately tested through quite rigorous examinations for law students.
And what's really interesting to maybe reflect on is that even though it can seem like a very technical, maybe even dry area of law,
It has that reputation
it
sometimes.
does.
Yeah.
But it actually touches on something incredibly fundamental to human society, our relationship with the land beneath our feet, our sense of
Yeah.
place, security, wealth.
Absolutely. It underpins so much.
It definitely gives you a fresh perspective, doesn't it? Makes you think about the ground you're standing on right now in a whole new light, perhaps.
It certainly can. And, considering the long history we've discussed, it perhaps raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. How do you think those really old ideas about land ownership, from Norman times even,
Yeah.
how might they still be subtly shaping how modern property law works today, even in our very market-driven 21st century system? Are there still echoes we don't always notice?
Hmm. That is definitely food for thought. How much does the past still dictate the present in land law? Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fundamentals of property law. It's clearly a constantly evolving area, and having even just a basic grasp of its foundations is, I think, really key to understanding so much of the world around us.